This is the Roots and All Budcast, presented by Sarah Wilson.
Hi, and welcome to the Tuesday Budcast. Today's ramblings will be about roses, houseplant trends, and trimming your bushes. I'll also be letting you into a secret about how I feel about my garden right now. So first, I wanted to make an observation about roses this year. I've noticed two things about the roses in my garden and in my clients' gardens, and that is that they have hardly any black spot. Hurrah! Black spot is a fungus that infects the leaves and stems of roses. It shows up usually just after a rose plant has properly leafed up at the beginning of the year, and it stays put all summer, looking progressively worse as the year goes on. In a bad year, and with a rose that's particularly susceptible to it, you might find by this time of year that it's almost leafless because the black spot covers the leaves, which eventually turn yellow and fall off. Black spot's worse in a year when we have a lot of rain and wet conditions because these are the conditions in which the fungus thrives. But this year, the rose leaves look all green and lovely and the plants seem to be thriving. I mentioned powdery mildew in the last podcast, and this is a problem you may find yourself facing this year instead, but it seems we've stayed mercifully free of it here in the southeast at least. I have a blog post on the website about black spot, so do have a look at that if you're interested. The second thing I've noticed about the roses this year is that they've had two distinct flowering periods. Last year, for example, my roses didn't really have an off period and they just seemed to keep flowering on and on from June to October, the same in my clients' gardens. But this year they flowered once in June, and since then they've been gathering their energy and they're just about to have their second bloom, or flush as it's known in the trade. I tried to look into what causes a plant to flower, and I discovered how flowering is triggered, which is apparently due to a chemical that's released in the plant, but I couldn't find out what actually causes this chemical to be released. Some plants flower according to environmental triggers such as day length, and they all bloom when they have the best chance of reproduction because in nature, flowers are followed by seeds which contain the next generation of the plant. I'm assuming the roses are having two distinct flowering periods because this summer has been hot and dry, and that's about as specific as I can be with regard to precisely why this has happened. Going down the rabbit hole of looking into flower production in roses made me think about how little we still know about how plants work. In fields like human biology, we know things such as the overwhelming love a mother feels for her newborn child is caused by nothing more romantic than a massive flood of the chemical oxytocin going through her body, and scientists know why her body produces this. With plants, we don't know everything about them down to the last detail. There's still room for a bit of magic, and I think that's why I like them. Moving on to talk about indoor plants and some must-have arrivals that arrived in the shop this week. Anyone who knows me knows that along with my partner Jason, I opened a gardening shop in Hastings in 2016, and we've just passed the second anniversary of the shop being open. The shop is now Jason's baby, and he's been thrust into the world of houseplants due to the demand for them from our customers. In fact, I'll be speaking to Jason in the next main podcast episode, which is released on the 28th of August, and he'll be sharing his tips on the best houseplants, the worst ones, and what you can do when things start to go wrong with them. So there were two new interesting additions to the houseplant collection in store this week. The first was a variegated aspidistra, which has been a real talking point. The second was a crocodile fern, and I'd never come across this before, and it really is a gorgeous plant with the most fantastic leaves. I've posted a picture of it on all my socials, my Facebook, which is Roots and All UK, Twitter, which is Roots and All, and Instagram, which is Roots and All Pod. So the proper name for this plant is Microsorum musifolium crocodilus. A quick trawl of the internet revealed a couple of interesting things to note. The plant is an epiphyte, meaning it grows like an orchid or a staghorn fern or an air plant. So it grows upon another plant for support, but not for food. This is an indicator of how it likes to be looked after, i.e. it wants lots of moisture in the air around it, as this is how it's supposed to take up water. The crown of the plant is also designed to catch detritus, and the plant will convert this to food. In the absence of any detritus falling into your plant while it grows in your house, hopefully, you'll need to supply food artificially by giving it a weakened down solution of houseplant feed once a fortnight. Try using twice as much water as is recommended on the bottle to dilute the feed to give you the correct strength. The other interesting thing about this fern is that you can divide it in order to propagate it. The only way you can normally propagate a fern is by collecting the tiny spores off the underside of the leaves and sowing them on the surface of some compost, almost as you would with seeds. Somebody asked me last week if the brown dots on the bottom of a fern leaf were some type of insect, and the answer is no, these are spores. They're so tiny, they're like dust, but they are the fern version of seeds, so don't feel you need to get rid of them, they're perfectly normal. In fact, the crocodile fern has them on the underside of its leaves too, you just can't see them as well because they're so tiny. In fact, this is where the plant gets its name, microsporum, micro being small and sporum referring to the pores on the leaves which contain the reproductive spores. If you're interested in plant names, you might like to get hold of a book which is called RHS Practical Latin for Gardeners. Botanical Latin honestly isn't as boring as it sounds once you start getting the hang of it, and it can give you many clues about how to look after your plants if you understand what the names indicate. The other great thing about the crocodile fern is that if you can bear to cut off a couple of the larger leaves, it makes a brilliant foliage addition to cut flower arrangements. I discovered this to my cost when I broke a leaf off of one in the shop. So I was also asked a question on Instagram about when you should trim your box plants, and traditionally this used to be done on Derby Day, which for the non-horse racing fans among you is when the Derby is run at Epsom Racecourse, and that's always the first Saturday in June. If that happens to be a lovely sunny day though, don't trim your box because it's likely to turn brown. You're best to wait for an overcast day when the sun can't do too much damage to the cut leaves. That said, this year we ended up cutting the box on one of the hottest days in mid-July in one of my clients' gardens, and it hasn't suffered too many ill effects. So if you haven't got round to cutting your box, do it now. The only time I wouldn't advise it is when it's raining, as box blight is a fungal disease that infects box, and like the black spot I was talking about on the roses, it spreads more in damp weather. So the answer is to cut your box when you get time to do it. If, like many of us, you always have 1,000,001 things to do, it's probably best to ignore the traditions and rules and just crack on with it when your intent matches up with your schedule. And so to let you in on my garden secret, I am fed up with my garden at the moment. I haven't done anything to it except water a few bits for weeks now because, frankly, the whole thing's getting on my nerves. It looks crap. There's nothing I can do to help it, and I'm inclined to just leave it well alone until we get some rain and things start moving again. I'm not even deadheading with my usual fervour because I just can't bring myself to convince the plants they should limp on flowering in these difficult conditions. So I'm watering my pots, keeping the pond and water features topped up, plus putting out bowls of water and bird feed for the wildlife, and I'm letting everything get on with it until normal service resumes. So I guess what I'm saying is it's okay to acknowledge when things don't look great and even to turn your back on them for a while without needing to try and fix everything. In gardening, and probably in life in general, you're quite often not in control, so just get on with it. It's all much more stress-free if you do. So, thank you for listening, and don't forget to email podcast@rootsandall.co.uk if you want to reach out and say hello. Bye for now.
For more information, visit the Roots and All website at rootsandall.co.uk. To download more episodes, visit iTunes, your favourite podcast provider, or get them direct from our website.